Joe Goldberg is a master manipulator, obviously. He manipulated so many people throughout the entire show. But would you believe me if I told you that he actually manipulated you too? Yes, you, the audience. He also manipulated you. So today I'm gonna go through every single time Joe Goldberg manipulated you. Starting off with season 1. Right from the very beginning, Joe presents himself as a thoughtful, book-loving guy. Joe meets Beck at the bookstore and helps her find a book. But right after, he says some creepy things about her chest as she's grabbing the book, which throws the audience off a little bit. But his soft-spoken demeanor makes him appear endearing, diverting attention from his intrusive behavior. Then we see Joe interact with his young neighbor Paco, offering him books and advice. He shows kindness to Paco, positioning himself as a protector. And subconsciously, as the viewer, these moments of compassion make us question the extent of his malice. But Joe did a lot of things to prove to himself that he wasn't a bad guy, and this is one of them, which then manipulates us, the viewer, into thinking he's really not that bad. Joe stalks Beck and follows her to the bar that she's reading her poem at. She drunkenly stumbles off and then falls onto the train tracks where Joe is there to help her. And because we're seeing this from Joe's perspective and Joe's memory, we see that they shared a romantic moment together. But in reality, he stalked her all the way there. But Joe is so great at painting himself as this white knight that we subconsciously start to believe that he did a good deed. Joe then kills Benji, rationalizing that he's a bad influence on Beck. He hyperfixates on all the horrible things that Benji said about Beck, rationalizing that he's a bad person and a bad influence on Beck. And because the entire show is from Joe's perspective, Benji is made out to be a horrible guy because we're seeing him through Joe's mind, and Joe thinks he's a horrible person and deserves to be dead. Joe highlights all of Benji's negative traits, so he garners unintended sympathy for his actions. And although what he did was so drastic, us as the audience start to believe that he's actually Beck's protector, and we start to get desensitized to how crazy his actions truly are. Next, Joe kills Peach, and he tries to justify this by saying that she's gonna ruin Beck's life. And because we're seeing it from Joe's point of view, it is very embellished. He highlighted all the pictures that Peach had of Beck on her computer, and he made her seem like such a threat that we as the audience started to believe it ourselves. And because he had such animosity towards Peach, when he killed her, we thought it was a good thing because he was protecting Beck. Then he kills Ron, and it seems right to do because he's an abuser. But Joe thinks he's so above the law that he can get away with that, and instead of going to the police, he decides to deal with Ron himself. And although this could be viewed as self-defense, Joe thinks that he's the white knight that swooped in and saved Paco from this evil man. And he should have gotten the authorities involved, but he didn't because Joe likes to play God. Murdering someone is never right, and in this situation, Joe made us feel like it was right because Ron was a bad person. But that doesn't justify taking someone else's life when that's what the authorities are for. And finally for this season, Joe kills Beck and publishes her manuscript, portraying her as a successful author. He frames himself as if he's honoring her legacy. He lets her have all the credit and all the fame. And this is seen as a noble act, overshadowing his role in her death. The way he talks about her makes it seem like she had this coming, even though he's the one that killed her. And as an audience, we can't help but think that he helped her reach her dreams. But at what cost? Right at the beginning of season 2, Joe moves to Los Angeles, adopting the new alias Will Bettelheim. And this in itself is manipulating us because it shows that he's attempting to start over, claiming a new desire to change. And this narrative of self-reinvention taps into personal growth, making viewers hopeful for his transformation. And Joe truthfully believes that he can change, which makes the audience believe that he can as well. Then, when Candace shows up, Joe tells Love that Candace is unstable and obsessed with him. And due to the way that Joe portrays Candace in this entire show makes the audience dislike her. This makes her seem like the aggressor in this entire situation, undermining her credibility. And by making the audience doubt Candace, Joe shifts suspicion away from himself yet again. And lastly, Joe criticizes Love for her violent actions despite his own history of murder. He killed people in the same exact way that Love killed Delilah. For example, Peach. But he justified that to himself. And because he justified this to himself and also the audience, it positions him as morally superior. And although this hypocrisy is subtle, it leads viewers to overlook his past and focus on Love killing an innocent woman. Although Joe has done that multiple times. In season 3, Joe emphasizes his role as a father to Henry, suggesting that parenthood has reformed him. He uses fatherhood to portray himself as responsible and changed, and the parental narrative evokes empathy from the audience. And because we see an innocent baby, we really do believe that Joe is going to change. And he believes himself too, so much that it manipulates us as the audience to also think that. Joe projects blame a lot in this series, and Joe attributes the dysfunction in his marriage to Love's instability, while also ignoring his own infidelities and obsessions. And by focusing on Love's actions, viewers may overlook all of Joe's wrongdoings. When Joe learned Love killed Natalie, he looks at her like she's a monster, even though Joe has also also killed people that he thought were in the way of his relationship. Peach, Benji, Candace's music producer. This is Joe's attempt yet again at putting himself on a higher morality scale than love. In season 4, Joe experiences a psychological split with the persona of Reese Montrose embodying his darker impulses, and he disassociates from his violent tendencies, attributing them to an alternate persona. And this separation of characters allows viewers to detach from Joe and his crimes, preserving his likability to the audience. And at the end of season 4, when Joe finds out that he's the Eat the Rich killer, he actually expresses guilt over his past actions, suggesting that he needs to be punished for them. And this moment of apparent self-awareness encourages viewers yet again to believe that he can change, because these displays of remorse lead us to forgive or maybe even excuse his behavior. Even after all he did, us as the audience didn't want him to die, even if that's maybe what he deserved. He is such a great manipulator that he was able to manipulate us only by watching the show. In season 5, Joe rebrands himself as this benevolent figure, and he leverages his relationship with Kate Lockwood to gain public admiration. And this makes us as the viewer genuinely believe that he changed. When Joe figures out Bronte's true identity as Louise Flannery, Joe attempts to manipulate her emotions, casting doubt on her perceptions. And we've seen him do this to so many women and so many people throughout this entire series. He tries his best to undermine Bronte's credibility to maintain control over the narrative. This is the same thing he tried to do many times when he ended up hurting someone he apparently didn't mean to hurt. But this manipulation starts to make viewers question whether or not Bronte's actions are justified. She broke Joe's trust and lied to him, so we think that she did something wrong. Joe loves to share his traumatic past to get sympathy, framing his actions as coping mechanisms. And he constantly uses his personal trauma to justify his outrageous behavior. But subconsciously, we start to rationalize his actions. At the end of season 5, Joe receives fan mail in prison, highlighting how charisma can overshadow morality. And this is where he starts to point the blame at society. Joe deflects responsibility, suggesting that societal flaws are to blame for his actions. He deflects accountability by pointing fingers at societal issues. And because he rightfully critiques these people that send him fan mail, we agree with him because there shouldn't be any romanticization of toxic figures, especially serial killers. But this starts to stray away from the fact of everything Joe did. And the only reason he's getting this fan mail in the first place is the way that he portrayed himself to society. All of his horrible actions have led him to this exact moment in his life. In the end, Joe still thinks that he's in the right for everything he did. And when his son Henry calls him and says that you're the monster under my bed this whole time, and all of the monsters that Joe killed because they were horrible people, Joe is actually 100 times worse than every single one of these people. But Joe will never think that, and he even manipulated us into thinking that he was in the right for a lot of these situations. If you've ever gotten manipulated by Joe Goldberg as a viewer, I really want you to let me know in the comments below. If you ever hoped he'd get away with something or ever hoped he wouldn't go to jail or get caught, this counts, and this means that you were also manipulated by Joe Goldberg. I can say that I definitely have for myself because I did not want him to go to jail in the last season. I was so upset. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. Bye!